The call to the acquisitions firm took less than 10 minutes. In those 10 minutes, I dismantled a 40-year legacy and erased the future I had so carefully built for my only son, Michael. I know what you're probably thinking. What kind of father does something so cold, so final? It sounds cruel, I'm sure. But before you judge the old man in this story, you need to understand what led me to that decision, with a phone in my hand that felt heavier than any hammer I'd ever held. You need to hear about the $200,000 loan taken out in my name, the signature that was a clumsy imitation of my own, and the slow, sickening realization that the family you sacrificed everything for sees you as nothing more than an obstacle to their next luxury vacation. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about what happens when a quiet man's love is met with unthinkable greed. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions about this story in the comments. It all started on a Tuesday with a simple trip to the bank. For 45 years, my days began the same way. The first light of dawn would filter through the bedroom window, painting soft gray stripes across the hardwood floor. The very floor I laid with my own hands back in 1978. The air always held the faint, sweet scent of the rose bushes Eleanor planted by the porch, a scent that somehow survived her passing. I'd make my coffee, black, no sugar, and take my mug to the back porch. From there, I could see the whole world I had built. The sturdy oak tree where Michael's tire swing used to hang, its rope long since rotted away, and the small, neat garage that housed my workshop. It wasn't a large life, but it was a good one. It was mine. My workshop was my sanctuary. Even after I retired and handed the contracting business over to Michael, I could never quite give up the feel of wood in my hands. The smell of cedar and pine sawdust was more comforting to me than any cologne. My tools, worn smooth from decades of use, were like extensions of my own fingers. I'd spend hours in there, carving small wooden animals for the neighborhood kids, or fixing a wobbly chair for a neighbor. It was simple, honest work. You take a raw piece of lumber, and with patience and care, you shape it into something useful, something beautiful. I believed you could do the same with a life, with a family. You pour your love and effort into it, and it becomes strong, enduring. Inside the house, every object told a story. The heart of the living room was my old leather armchair. Its surface was cracked and faded, a roadmap of our lives. That was where I sat with Eleanor every evening, her feet tucked under a blanket as we watched old movies. It was where I read The Hobbit to Michael for the first time, his small head resting against my chest, his breathing slow, and even as he drifted off to sleep. Sometimes, when the house was too quiet, I'd run my hand over the worn armrest, and I could almost feel the warmth of their presence, a faint echo in the leather. The chair wasn't just furniture, it was an archive of my most precious memories, the silent witness to a lifetime of love. I thought I had passed those values on to Michael. I saw so much of myself in him as a boy, his determination, his quick smile. I worked 60-hour weeks to make sure he had everything he needed, to give him the college education I never had. When he brought Chloe home, I admit I had my reservations. She was polished, beautiful, with an appetite for things that sparkled. But she made my son happy, and that was all that mattered to me. I wanted to be the kind of father-in-law who helped, not hindered. So when they needed a down payment for their condo, I didn't hesitate. I liquidated $75,000 from my retirement fund, the money Eleanor and I had saved for that trip to Italy we always dreamed of but never took. I told myself Eleanor would have wanted it this way. Family first. Over the last few years, the calls became more frequent. Dad, the property taxes are higher than we expected. Dad, the car needs a new transmission. It was always something. I'd log into my online banking and send over $500, sometimes $1,000. I pictured it going toward necessities, toward building their own solid foundation. I'd tell myself it was just a little boost, what any loving father would do. I'd see Chloe's pictures online, fancy dinners, designer handbags, tropical vacations. A small, nagging voice in the back of my mind would whisper, but I'd silence it. Michael was the CEO of a successful company. My company. Surely they could afford a few nice things. I chose to believe the story they were telling me, because the alternative was too painful to consider. I saw them as a young couple trying to get ahead, not as architects of a life built on my quiet sacrifices. The oak dining table I built for our wedding, the one that hosted decades of Thanksgiving dinners and birthday celebrations, now sat mostly empty. But in my mind, it was still full, a symbol of the family I was so proud to have raised. I was content in my quiet world, believing the legacy I had built was in safe hands. I had no idea that the foundation was already rotten from the inside out. The first real crack appeared on a Sunday, of all days. Sundays were supposed to be for family. For years after Eleanor passed, Michael would bring Chloe over for dinner. At first it was a comfort, a way to keep the silence from growing too loud in the rooms we once shared. But lately, those dinners had started to feel less like a reunion and more like an obligation. That particular evening, the air was heavy with the smell of roast chicken and the unspoken tension that had become their third dinner guest. We were sitting at the oak dining table, the one I built for our first anniversary. Its surface was covered in a constellation of small nicks and scratches, each one a testament to a life lived. A dropped fork from Michael's high chair, a deep gouge from a science project gone wrong. To me, it was beautiful. Chloe, however, saw things differently. She ran a perfectly manicured finger over one of the deeper scratches. "You know, Arthur," she said, her voice a little too bright. "They have these incredible epoxy resin tables now. You can get them to look like a river is flowing through the wood. So sleek, so modern." She looked at Michael, who nodded in agreement. "It would really open up this space, Dad. Give it a facelift." I looked down at the table, at the wood I had sanded and stained until it shone like honey under the light. A facelift, as if 40 years of memories were a blemish to be covered up. I just smiled faintly and said, "I'm rather fond of this one." Michael quickly changed the subject, but the comment hung in the air, a small, cold splinter in the warmth of the room. It wasn't just about a table, it was about a worldview. My world, built on history and meaning, was simply old to them. Theirs was built on the next new, shiny thing. A few weeks later, the phone rang. It was Michael. His voice was strained, rushed. "Dad, we're in a bit of a jam. The transmission on Chloe's car just went. The mechanic is quoting us $2,800. There's just no way we can swing that right now, not with property taxes due next month." I could hear Chloe whispering in the background. My heart went out to him. A car repair is the kind of unexpected blow that can knock a young family off their feet. I thought of my own struggles starting out, how a single unexpected bill could mean eating nothing but potatoes for a month. "Of course, son," I said without hesitation. "I'll transfer it over this afternoon." I hung up the phone feeling that familiar sense of purpose, the quiet satisfaction of a father providing for his child. I was helping them build their foundation, just as my own father had helped me. That feeling lasted until the following Saturday. I was scrolling through the internet, looking up a new type of wood finish, when I saw a picture Chloe had been tagged in. It was from her friend's account, posted 2 days after Michael's phone call. The photo showed a group of women at a fancy restaurant downtown, the kind with white tablecloths and wine glasses the size of fish bowls. Chloe was front and center, laughing, raising a glass for the camera. She was wearing a new coat, a camel-colored thing that looked impossibly soft. But it was the purse sitting on the table next to her that made my breath catch. It was a designer bag, one I recognized from a magazine ad I'd seen. I remembered the ad because the price had made me whistle. It was just over $3,000. $3,000 for a purse. I closed the laptop slowly. The click of the lid sounded like a door slamming shut in a distant room. I sat there in the quiet of my living room, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor. The numbers churned in my mind. $2,800 for a transmission. $3,000 for a handbag. The math was simple, but the conclusion was something my mind refused to accept. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe the purse was a gift. Maybe the photo was old. I made excuses for them because the alternative was a chasm I wasn't ready to look into. I walked over to my leather armchair and sank into it, the worn material groaning under my weight. I ran my hand over the armrest, seeking the familiar comfort, the echo of Eleanor's presence, but for the first time, the chair felt cold. The memories it held seemed to mock me, ghosts of a naive man who couldn't see what was right in front of him. The foundation I thought I was helping them build wasn't made of concrete and steel. It was made of lies, and I was just beginning to feel the tremors. The Tuesday I discovered the loan was the longest day of my life. The next 3 were an eternity. I didn't go to the workshop. The scent of cedar, which had always calmed me, now felt like an accusation. How could I create something honest and sturdy when the very foundation of my family was built on deceit? I spent most of my time in the old leather armchair, the one that had held so much joy. Now it just felt like a hollow shell. I'd stare at the phone, my hand hovering over it, my mind replaying the bank manager's words, seeing that forged signature in my sleep. I felt a profound, bottomless grief, the kind that steals the air from your lungs. It was worse than when Eleanor died. That was a tragedy. This was a betrayal. On Friday evening, they showed up unannounced. I heard their new SUV, a behemoth that cost more than my first 2 houses combined, pull into the driveway. The engine purred for a moment before cutting out, a sound of obscene luxury in the quiet evening. I didn't get up. I just sat in my armchair, listening to their footsteps on the porch boards I had laid myself. Michael used his key, and the sound of the lock turning felt like a violation. They walked in, Chloe leading the way, a bright, artificial smile plastered on her face. She was carrying a bottle of wine that probably cost $100. "Dad, we were in the neighborhood and thought we'd surprise you," Michael said, his voice a little too loud, a little too cheerful. He avoided my eyes, busying himself with taking off his jacket. Chloe glided over to the oak dining table and set the wine down with a soft click. "We brought you a lovely Cabernet, Arthur. We should open it. We have something wonderful to discuss. An opportunity, really." I didn't move. I just looked at them. The grief inside me had cooled over the last few days, solidifying into something heavy and cold, like a block of granite in my chest. "I'm not drinking tonight," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of emotion. The fake cheerfulness faltered. Chloe exchanged a quick, irritated glance with Michael. He cleared his throat. "Okay, well, Dad, we've been doing a lot of thinking. About the future, about your future, and ours." He finally looked at me, his expression a poorly rehearsed mask of concern. "This house, it's a lot for one person to manage. The upkeep, the property taxes. It's a huge asset just sitting here." I remained silent, my hands resting on the worn arms of my chair. I waited. Chloe stepped forward, taking charge. She gestured around the living room with a sweep of her hand. "What Michael is trying to say, Arthur, is that we have a plan. A brilliant one. We've spoken to a realtor. The market in this area is unbelievable right now. We could sell this place for close to $900,000, maybe more." I stared at her. The room, my home of 45 years, suddenly felt like a set, and she was a director deciding it was time to tear it down. "We'd pay off your line of credit, of course," she continued, her voice smooth and confident, as if she were doing me a favor. "All 200,000 of it. Then, with the rest, we can invest it. Michael has a friend in wealth management. We can make that money work. For us. For the family. You could move into a lovely retirement community. No more mowing the lawn, no more worrying about a leaky roof. It's the smart thing to do." The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. My eyes moved from her face to Michael's. He stood there, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, a grown man hiding behind his wife's ambition. They weren't just thieves, they were ghouls, trying to sell the bones of my life, the very sanctuary I built with my wife. Finally, I spoke. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension like a saw through pine. "The line of credit. The one you're so generously offering to pay off." Chloe's smile tightened. "Yes, it was a business expense, Arthur, a temporary cash flow issue. We were always going to handle it." "You signed my name," I said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Michael flinched as if I'd struck him, but Chloe, she didn't even blink. She crossed her arms, her expensive watch glinting under the lamplight. "We did what was necessary. You have to be aggressive in business." It's something you probably wouldn't understand. This is a different world now. And honestly, she added, her voice dripping with condescension, it's just a signature on a piece of paper. It's not like we hurt anyone. That was it. That was the moment. The final brittle thread of love and obligation inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud explosion, but a quiet, clean break. The pain vanished, and in its place was a clarity so sharp it was almost peaceful. I looked at my son, my only child, and I saw a stranger. I looked at his wife, and I saw a predator. They hadn't just hurt me. They had erased Eleanor. They had taken every sacrifice we ever made and declared it worthless. I slowly pushed myself up from the leather armchair, the springs groaning in protest. I stood tall, taller than I had felt in years. I looked them both in the eye, one after the other. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to rage. My decision was already made, settling over me like a shroud. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady and cold. "You've made everything perfectly clear." They were gone. The heavy thud of the front door closing echoed through the house, followed by the purr of their SUV's engine fading into the night. A profound silence descended, thicker and heavier than any I had ever known. I stood motionless in the center of the living room, the space where I had taught my son to walk, and I felt nothing. The hurricane of grief that had torn through me for days had finally exhausted itself, leaving behind a strange and unnerving calm. It was the stillness of a deep, frozen lake. On the surface, absolute peace. But underneath, a powerful, unseen current was beginning to move. Chloe's words hung in the air, sharp and clear as shards of glass. It's just a signature on a piece of paper. She hadn't just dismissed a felony, she had dismissed my entire existence. 40 years of rising before dawn, of hands raw from labor, of sacrifices made in silence. All of it reduced to a mere inconvenience, a piece of paper standing between her and her next luxury. They didn't see a father or a home filled with a lifetime of love. They saw an asset to be liquidated, an obstacle to be managed. They saw me as a relic, a sentimental old fool whose time was over. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. My eyes fell on the bottle of wine she had placed on the oak dining table, a $100 peace offering for a $200,000 betrayal. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of the gesture was almost admirable. I walked over and picked it up, feeling the cool, heavy glass in my hand. A part of me, the part that was still raw and wounded, wanted to smash it against the wall, to watch the dark red liquid stain the plaster like blood. But that would be their kind of reaction, loud, emotional, and ultimately powerless. My way had always been different. Slower, more methodical. I build things to last. I also know how to dismantle them, piece by piece. I set the bottle back down on the table with a soft, definitive click. I would not give them the satisfaction of a fight. I would not give them the drama they probably expected. They wanted to play a game of business, of assets and leverage. Very well. We would play. But we would play by my rules. I turned and looked at my old leather armchair. It seemed to be watching me, a silent, faithful companion. I ran my hand over its cracked armrest one last time, not for comfort, but as a final farewell to the naive man who used to sit there. That man was gone, burned to ash by the fire of his own son's greed. A new man stood in his place, one who understood that some structures, once the foundation is rotted, cannot be repaired. They must be demolished. A cold, clear plan began to assemble itself in my mind, not born of rage, but of a chilling purpose. It was precise, it was legal, and it would be final. I walked past the armchair, out of the living room, and toward the basement door. Down in the damp, cool air, inside a locked metal file cabinet that hadn't been opened in 15 years, was a piece of paper of my own. A document that was far more than just a signature. It was the deed to their entire world. And I was about to foreclose. The night after they left was the first night I truly slept in a week. There were no ghosts in my dreams, no forged signatures dancing behind my eyelids. I woke before the sun, but instead of the familiar ache of grief, I felt a cold, hard clarity in my bones. The world outside my window was still shrouded in the soft gray of pre-dawn, but inside my mind, everything was sharp and illuminated. I didn't make coffee. I didn't go to the porch. I went straight to the basement. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and time. In the far corner, behind a stack of old paint cans, sat the gray two-drawer metal file cabinet. I hadn't opened it since Eleanor's passing, when I'd filed away her death certificate. The key was exactly where I left it, tucked into the spine of an old woodworking manual. It turned in the lock with a rusty groan. Inside, the files were meticulously organized, 40 years of a life's work, contained in manila folders. I bypassed tax returns from 1985 and blueprints for the Miller family's deck extension from 1992. My fingers, calloused from a lifetime of labor, found the folder I was looking for. It was labeled simply, A. Miller & Son Contracting, Inc. Incorporation, 1983. The papers inside were crisp, the typewritten letters sharp against the slightly yellowed page. I pulled out the Articles of Incorporation, dated March 15, 1983, and there it was in Article 4, Section 2. The corporation shall issue 1,000 shares of common stock. 510 shares shall be held by Arthur Miller, founder and president. 490 shares shall be held in a non-voting trust for the benefit of Michael Miller, to be transferred upon the founder's retirement or death. He had forgotten, in his rush to become CEO, to put his name on the door and his picture on the website. He had forgotten the one detail that mattered. He was the face of the company, but I was its heart and its owner. I spent the rest of Saturday in my workshop, but not with wood. I spread the documents across my workbench, the same surface where I'd helped Michael build his first Pinewood Derby car. I compiled a neat stack: the incorporation papers, the deed to the commercial yard and office building on Sycamore Avenue, which was still solely in my name, leased to the company for a symbolic $1 a year, and my last 5 years of personal bank statements showing the steady bleed of funds to Michael's account. A transfer of $1,500 on June 10th for their anniversary dinner. Another $2,800 on August 22nd for a car repair. It was a meticulous ledger of my own foolishness, but now it was evidence. By Sunday afternoon, I had a timeline, a list of assets, and a clear, 3-step plan. The old me, the father, would have called his son. The new me, the majority shareholder, picked up the phone book. On Monday morning at precisely 9 a.m., I was not in my workshop. I was sitting in the sterile, air-conditioned lobby of a law firm downtown. The firm, Donahue, Finch & Albright, was known for corporate litigation, not family disputes. That was intentional. A woman with a severe haircut and an impeccably tailored suit called my name. This was Eleanor Albright. Her office was all glass and chrome, overlooking the city from the 27th floor. It felt like another world, cold and impersonal, and for my purposes, it was perfect. I didn't offer pleasantries. I laid the folder on her expansive mahogany desk. I want to understand my options, I said. She listened without interruption for 20 minutes as I laid out the facts, my voice even and detached. I spoke of the business, the 51% ownership, the property deed, and finally, the $200,000 fraudulent loan. Her expression never changed, but her eyes, sharp and intelligent, missed nothing. When I finished, she spent another 30 minutes silently reading through every document I had brought. The only sounds were the rustle of paper and the distant wail of a siren from the street below. Finally, she folded her hands on top of the incorporation papers. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice crisp, "your options are quite clear, and you are in a position of remarkable strength." She explained I could initiate a hostile takeover, call an emergency board meeting, which consisted of me and, technically, a lawyer I could appoint, and vote to remove Michael as CEO immediately. We could sue him for the fraudulent loan and likely win. But, she cautioned, that would be a long, messy, and public fight. It would likely bankrupt him, but it would also drag your family name through the mud for years. She paused, leaning forward slightly. However, there is a cleaner, more final option. Your 51% stake gives you unilateral power to approve a sale of the entire company. You find a buyer, you sign the papers. It's over. Michael's 49% would be bought out at fair market value, leaving him with a substantial sum of money, but no company, no title, and no career. I didn't have to think about it. A public fight was what they deserved, but it wasn't what I wanted. I didn't want revenge. I wanted erasure. I wanted to close this chapter of my life and never have to look back. "The sale," I said. "That's the option I choose." Ms. Albright nodded, a flicker of what might have been respect in her eyes. She gave me the names of two of the most aggressive corporate acquisition firms in the state. She told me to prepare a summary of the company's financials, assets, liabilities, and gross revenue for the last fiscal year, which I knew by heart was $18.6 million. Her fee was a flat $15,000 retainer, which I paid on the spot from my personal savings. She would begin drafting the preliminary sales agreements, contingent on finding a buyer. The process, she said, could take as little as 60 days. As I left her office, I felt a weight lift that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. The plan was no longer just an idea. It was in motion. It had a timeline. It had a price. The gears were turning, silent and invisible, and Michael was about to be crushed by a machine he never even knew existed. The phone felt cold and foreign in my hand, nothing like the worn, familiar grip of a hammer or a saw. I dialed the first number Ms. Albright had given me, Vanguard Capital Partners. A crisp, professional voice answered on the second ring. I stated my name and my purpose with a clarity that surprised even me. My name is Arthur Miller. I am the majority shareholder of A. Miller & Son Contracting, Inc. I am exploring the possibility of a complete sale of the company. There was a brief pause on the other end, the sound of typing. The man, whose name was David Chen, didn't sound surprised. To him, this was just another transaction, another Tuesday. He asked for the company's gross revenue for the last fiscal year. $18.6 million, I said, the number feeling strange on my tongue. It was a figure I had always been proud of, a testament to a lifetime of work. Now it was just a data point in a negotiation. He requested a full financial portfolio, asset inventories, profit and loss statements for the last 3 years, and a list of all outstanding debts. I can have that for you by the end of the week, I told him, my mind already working on the logistics. The call took less than 10 minutes. In those 10 minutes, I had set in motion the dismantling of a 40-year legacy. The next step was the most difficult. I needed access to the company's books, and I couldn't get them without going through Michael. A direct request would raise immediate suspicion. But I had an advantage he had long forgotten. The building itself. The office and the 2-acre equipment yard on Sycamore Avenue were not company assets. They were my assets, leased to the corporation for $1 a year. The lease agreement, which I had retrieved from my file cabinet along with the incorporation papers, contained a standard clause allowing the property owner to conduct an audit of the lessee's financials to ensure solvency. It was a legal backdoor, a key he never knew I held. I called the office on Wednesday morning. Michael's assistant, a young woman named Brenda who had always been kind to me, answered the phone. Brenda, it's Arthur Miller. I need to schedule a time to come in and review the lease and insurance documents. My personal accountant needs updated copies for my estate planning. It was a plausible lie wrapped in the uncomfortable truth of my own mortality. She put me on the schedule for Friday at 10 a.m. Walking into that office felt like stepping into a stranger's house. The familiar smell of sawdust and coffee had been replaced by a cloying, citrus-scented air freshener. The solid oak reception desk I had built was gone, replaced by a monstrosity of glass and chrome. Chloe's influence was everywhere. In the abstract art on the walls that looked like spilled paint, in the sleek, uncomfortable-looking chairs. Michael met me in the lobby, a forced smile on his face. Dad! Brenda told me you were coming. Estate planning, huh? A little morbid, don't you think? He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that was meant to be familiar but felt like a shove. Don't worry, we'll take good care of the place when you're gone. He laughed, as if he'd made a clever joke. I just looked at him, my expression unreadable. I need the P&L statements for the last 3 years, the current list of assets, and the accounts payable ledger, I said, my voice flat. His smile faltered. What for? The lease agreement is $1 a year. You know we're good for it. My accountant wants to see the company's overall financial health, I said, meeting his gaze. It's standard procedure, Michael. He huffed, annoyed at the inconvenience. Fine. Brenda will get you what you need. I've got a lunch meeting. We're landing the new downtown high-rise contract. Big money. He walked away without a backward glance, already focused on his next conquest, completely oblivious to the fact that I was there to sell the kingdom he thought he ruled. Brenda showed me to a small, unused office and brought me 3 thick binders. For the next 4 hours, I sat under the hum of fluorescent lights and dissected the life of the company I had built. The numbers told a story of success, but also of a creeping rot. The revenue was strong, just as I'd known. But the expenses were bloated, cancerous. I saw a monthly consulting fee of $15,000 being paid to a company I'd never heard of. C Designs, LLC. A quick search on my phone confirmed my suspicion. The company was registered to Chloe. Its address was their condo. She was billing the company $180,000 a year to, presumably, pick out ugly art. I saw the business trip to Aspen, which cost the company over $32,000. I saw charges for client dinners at restaurants I knew were Chloe's favorites, often exceeding $1,000 a night. And then I found it, buried in the accounts payable ledger under capital equipment financing. A series of 5 payments, each for $40,000, made to the same bank that held my fraudulent line of credit. The dates corresponded perfectly. He was using the company's own profits to pay back the money he had stolen from me, robbing the business to cover up his personal theft. He wasn't just a greedy son. He was a terrible businessman, treating the company like his personal piggy bank. I took detailed pictures of every page with my phone, my hand steady as a surgeon's. That evening, I didn't go to the workshop. I sat at my old oak dining table, the laptop open, the numbers glowing in the dim light. I compiled a clean, professional prospectus. I listed the assets: a fleet of 22 trucks, heavy machinery valued at over $4.5 million, and a list of secured contracts for the next 5 years, totaling nearly $75 million. I also included the liabilities, including the suspicious consulting fees and travel expenses. Honesty was the sharpest tool I had. I emailed the complete package to David Chen at Vanguard Capital. Then I opened a new message and sent the exact same package to the second firm on Ms. Albright's list, Sterling Acquisitions. Let the bidding begin. The house was silent, except for the quiet clicking of the keyboard. For the first time in weeks, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt powerful. It was the quiet of a hunter in a blind, waiting patiently for his target to walk into the open. The trap was set. All I had to do now was wait for it to spring. The first sign of the tremor reached me exactly 8 days after I sent the prospectus. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The sun was warm on my back as I worked in the yard, trimming the rose bushes Eleanor had planted. The scent of cut stems and damp earth filled the air, a smell of simple, honest work. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Michael. I let it ring twice before answering, wiping the dirt from my hands on my jeans. "Dad?" His voice was tight, stretched thin like a wire. "I just got off a very strange call." I said nothing, just continued to prune a dead branch. The snip of the shears was the only sound on my end of the line. A man named David Chen from a place called Vanguard Capital Partners. He said he was following up on a prospectus he received about a potential acquisition of the company. He paused, waiting for me to react. When I didn't, he continued, his voice rising slightly. "He knew our revenue numbers, Dad. He knew everything. I told him he was mistaken, that the company wasn't for sale. He just said he'd be in touch." "That is strange," I said, my voice calm and even. I snipped another branch. "That's it? That's all you have to say?" he asked, a note of disbelief in his voice. "This has to be some kind of corporate espionage, some competitor trying to rattle us before the high-rise bid. Did you talk to anyone? Mention anything to one of your old buddies?" "No, Michael, I haven't spoken to anyone," I said, and it was the truth. I hadn't spoken. I had acted. I let the silence hang between us, a heavy, suffocating blanket. I could hear him breathing on the other end, the gears in his mind grinding, trying to make sense of something that was beyond his comprehension. He hung up without saying goodbye. The second call came on Friday. This time, there was no pretense of confusion. There was only pure, unfiltered rage. "Sterling Acquisitions just sent a letter of intent to the office," he yelled into the phone, his voice cracking. "They sent it to the majority shareholder, addressed to you, at the office. Brenda opened it by mistake. What did you do? What in the hell did you do? I'm busy right now, Michael, I said calmly. We can talk later. No, we're going to talk now, he shouted. I'm on my way over. I hung up the phone and went inside. I washed my hands at the kitchen sink, watching the dirt swirl down the drain. I made myself a cup of coffee, black, no sugar, and sat down at the oak dining table to wait. I didn't have to wait long. 20 minutes later, their SUV screeched into the driveway, gravel crunching under the tires. The front door burst open, and they stormed in. Michael's face was a blotchy, furious red. Chloe trailed behind him, her face a mask of cold fury, her expensive coat clutched around her as if she were entering a contaminated zone. You have to call them off, Michael said, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He was breathing heavily, pacing back and forth in front of the fireplace. Whatever this insane game is, you have to end it now. This is my company you're playing with. It was never your company, Michael, I said quietly, taking a slow sip of my coffee. You were the CEO. There's a difference. Chloe stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor. Don't be ridiculous, Arthur. You're going to destroy his entire career, everything he's worked for, because you're upset about a loan? It was a business decision. It's paid back every month. There was no harm done. My eyes met hers across the table. Was the $180,000 you paid yourself last year also a business decision? As a design consultant? Or the $32,000 for the business trip to a ski resort in Aspen? Or were those just theft, plain and simple? The color drained from her face. Michael stopped pacing. The room went dead silent. They stared at me, their expressions a mixture of shock and horror. The hunter had just revealed he'd been watching them from the blind the entire time. How? Michael stammered. How did you? I own the building you work in, son. The lease gives me the right to review the books. You should read the fine print sometime. I took another sip of coffee. It was hot and bitter. You used company money to make the payments on the fraudulent loan you took out in my name. You were stealing from your own business to cover up the fact that you stole from your father. Michael finally collapsed into the armchair opposite me, the new, modern one they had bought me for Christmas 2 years ago, the one I never sat in. He put his head in his hands. He looked small, defeated. Chloe, however, recovered quickly, her fear hardening back into arrogance. So what? She snapped. You'll sell the company just to spite us? You'll leave your own son with nothing? On the contrary, I said, setting my mug down with a soft click. The initial offers are quite strong. Vanguard's is for $24 million. Sterling's is for 26.5. Once the sale is finalized, your 49% stake will be paid out. It will be a substantial sum. More than enough to buy all the watches and handbags you could ever want. Of course, I added, looking directly at Michael. The final amount will be adjusted to account for the $200,000 loan, plus interest, and several other unauthorized withdrawals. I believe the legal term is embezzlement. He looked up, his eyes wide with panic. The reality was finally sinking in. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a demolition. Dad, please, he whispered, his voice pleading for the first time. Don't do this. Think of Mom. Think of what she would want. I turned my head and looked at the old, worn leather armchair sitting in the corner. Its surface a roadmap of a life well lived. I thought of Eleanor, of her quiet strength, her unwavering moral compass. And I knew exactly what she would want. Your mother, I said, my voice as cold and hard as steel, would have been ashamed of what you've become. You are not the man we raised. I stood up from the table. Now, I suggest you both leave. I'm expecting a call from my lawyer. They left without another word, the silence in my house a welcome relief. But it wasn't over. I knew it wouldn't be. The final act was yet to come. Ms. Albright arranged the closing for 2 weeks later on a Thursday morning at 10 a.m. The location was not her office, but a neutral, sterile boardroom on the 30th floor of the Vanguard Capital Partners building. A place with no memories, no history. A fitting venue for an execution. I wore a simple gray suit, one I hadn't worn since Eleanor's funeral. It felt stiff and unfamiliar, a costume for a role I never wanted to play. As I rode the silent, high-speed elevator up, I didn't feel anger or even satisfaction. I felt a profound, weary sadness. I was a builder about to perform a demolition, and I knew the foundation I was about to shatter was one I had laid myself. They were already there when Ms. Albright and I walked in. The room was exactly as I had imagined. A long, gleaming table, black leather chairs, and a floor-to-ceiling window offering a cold, indifferent view of the city below. David Chin, the man from Vanguard, stood at the head of the table, his demeanor all brisk efficiency. Michael and Chloe sat opposite our assigned seats. Michael looked like a ghost. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his eyes were sunken and bloodshot, and he stared at the stack of documents in the center of the table as if it were a coiled snake. Chloe sat ramrod straight beside him, a statue of defiance. Her makeup was a perfect, hard shell, but a small muscle twitching in her jaw betrayed the fury beneath. David Chen cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense silence. "Good morning. The final sale agreement for the acquisition of A. Miller & Son Contracting, Inc. is before you. Everything is in order, as per our last discussion. If you'll direct your attention to the final page—" "Wait!" Michael's voice was a raw croak. He pushed his chair back and stood up, leaning his knuckles on the polished table. He looked only at me. "Dad, please, don't do this. We can fix it. I'll pay back the loan, every single cent. I'll fire Chloe's consulting firm. I'll do anything. But don't sign that paper. Don't erase our name. Miller & Son. It's my name. It's your name." I met his desperate gaze. The boy I once knew, the one who held my hand while crossing the street, was gone. In his place was a panicked stranger, pleading for a kingdom he had already burned down. The name on the building stopped meaning anything to me when you used it to steal from your own family, I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the table. A name is only as good as the integrity of the person who carries it. Chloe's brittle composure finally shattered. She shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Integrity?" she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "You're going to lecture us about integrity while you destroy your own son's life? This is pathetic. This is all because we wanted to update your dusty old house, isn't it? Because we don't worship your precious, worn-out armchair. You are a bitter, selfish old man, and when this is over, I will make sure everyone knows it. I will tell them how you threw your own family out on the street for nothing." Her words were meant to be daggers, but they landed like pebbles against a stone wall. The rage, the grief, the pain, it was all gone, burned away in the crucible of their betrayal. All that remained was a cold, hard clarity. I didn't even look at her. My eyes were fixed on Michael, who stood there, silent, letting her fight the battle he had already lost. "I'm not throwing you out on the street," I said, my voice even. "Your 49% share, after your debts to the company and to me are settled, will still leave you with over $11 million. You will be a very wealthy man. You just won't have a legacy." I finally turned my gaze to Chloe, and for the first time she flinched. "You see this as an act of destruction. But you're wrong. As a carpenter, I learned that some things cannot be fixed. When a foundation is rotted through with lies and greed, you don't try to patch it. You bring the whole structure down." I reached for the pen that lay beside the documents. It was heavy, gold, and cold to the touch. I thought of my old leather armchair, the silent witness to my life. I thought of Eleanor's laughter filling the rooms of the house I built for her. I wasn't destroying a family. I was protecting the memory of one. I uncapped the pen. The small click echoed in the silent room. "Dad, no," Michael whispered, sinking back into his chair, a final, broken plea. I ignored him. With a steady hand, the same hand that had taught him how to swing a hammer, I signed my name on the line. Arthur Miller. The scratch of the nib on the thick paper was the only sound. It was the sound of a lock turning for the last time, the sound of a door closing forever. I placed the cap back on the pen, stood up and pushed my chair in. Ms. Albright gathered her things. I didn't look back at them. As we walked out of the room, I left them behind, with their millions of dollars and the ruins of the world they had broken. If you liked this story, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments what you thought. I really want to know your opinion. Here you will always find stories that move, surprise, and bring lessons to take with you for life. The days that followed the sale were the quietest of my life. But it was a different kind of quiet. The heavy, suffocating silence of grief had lifted, replaced by a clean, peaceful stillness. The morning sun seemed to filter through the windows with a new warmth, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air not as signs of neglect, but as tiny, glittering promises of a new day. The house no longer felt like a tomb of memories. It felt like a home again. My home. The transfer of funds was completed within a week. After all debts were settled, including the fraudulent loan and the embezzled funds which were deducted directly from Michael's share, a sum of $13,472,850 was deposited into my personal account. The first thing I did was write a check from that account back to my own savings for exactly $275,000, the $200,000 they stole, plus the original $75,000 I gave them for their condo. It wasn't about the money, it was about closing a ledger, about restoring the balance of my own life's work. A few days later, I drove downtown and went to the woodworking supply store. I bought the set of Japanese carving tools I had wanted, the very reason I had gone to the bank that fateful Tuesday. Back in my workshop, the scent of cedar and pine was no longer an accusation. It was a welcome. I took a block of basswood, and with the new, razor-sharp chisels, I began to carve. I didn't have a plan. I just let my hands work, feeling the wood yield, watching the curls of shavings fall to the floor. It was simple, honest work. You take something raw, and with patience, you shape it into what it was meant to be. I was doing the same with my own life. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in months. I made myself a cup of tea and sat down in my old leather armchair. I ran my hand over the cracked, familiar surface. It was no longer a monument to betrayal, it was just a chair. My chair. It had held me through joy and grief, through love and loss, and it had held me through this. It was a witness not to my weakness, but to my endurance. I realized the legacy Eleanor and I built wasn't the company, the name over the door. It was this house. It was the integrity I refused to sacrifice. It was the quiet strength to see a thing through to its proper end. The chair didn't hold their ghosts anymore. It held the steadfast truth of who I was. I received one text message from Michael a month after the sale. It just said, "I'm sorry." I read the words, and for the first time I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, not even pity. It was like reading a message meant for someone else, a story from a life I no longer lived. I deleted it without replying. The next morning I went to a travel agency. I booked a single first-class ticket to Rome for the spring. I'm going to see the Colosseum, walk through the Tuscan vineyards, and eat pasta in a small cafe, just like Eleanor and I always dreamed. I'll take her picture with me. It's not the trip we planned, but it will be a tribute to the life we built, and a celebration of the one I have reclaimed. My life is my own again, built on a foundation that no one can ever take from me. In the end, it was never about the money. Money can be earned, and it can be lost. What I reclaimed that day in the boardroom was something far more valuable, my own self-respect. For years, I allowed my love for my son to blind me to the man he had become. I let them chip away at my savings, my peace of mind, and my dignity, all under the guise of family. But a family isn't built on transactions. It's built on trust and mutual respect. When that foundation crumbles, you can't just patch the cracks. You have to save yourself from the collapse. My life is quiet now, filled with the simple joy of shaping wood in my workshop and the comfort of my old armchair, which no longer feels haunted by betrayal. It's a testament to the fact that you can build a life, watch it get torn down, and have the strength to build it again, stronger and wiser. The greatest lesson is this: you must never allow anyone, not even your own blood, to put a price tag on your integrity. It's the one asset you can't afford to lose. If you liked this story, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments what you thought. I really want to know your opinion. Here you will always find stories that move, surprise, and bring lessons to take with you for life.